So, welcome back to Let's Play Defender's Quest by the developers. I'm Lars and
And I'm James Cavan.
and we are Level Up Labs. And last we finished, we had just finished the battle right in front of the Desert Fortress, right?
Yeah, so we are entering Act 4.
Act 4, right. And so do you want to tell us a little bit about this little blurb here?
This is something that I really wanted to get a little bit more of Klestkata's adventures into the story. This is something that I feel like basically, if you're going to write any kind of fantasy, you need to immerse yourself in historical records. Because there is so much of fantasy writing is done entirely in a modern voice. And I feel like if you're doing something that is trying to be from another time period, from another setting, you need to learn those voices. And so that's a lot of what I was trying to capture with these little blurbs that I couldn't in other aspects of the game. So this is kind of based off of the kind of long-winded medieval and Renaissance adventure stories that you'll get. So kind of the Sinbad the Sailor and the kind of like terminology and language they'll use.
Gotcha. And so this guy, Klestkata, he's some nomad that goes around doing crazy acts of daring do.
Yeah, and probably long dead, may not have even existed, but he's this kind of character that has all these stories associated with him.
And would his stories mostly be told within the nomads themselves, or is he kind of more of a Hiawatha kind of person where it's like, you know, kind of like it's an Indian story that the white people tell to each other?
Basically, I think the backstory to this was he is a nomad that got introduced to the Ash royal house and started telling all his stories.
Okay.
So that's why we have them preserved. These things are, for the most part, things that Azra would have read.
Gotcha. And so that's kind of like why we always have these little blurbs and stuff, is that it's like the main viewpoint character for this story is Azra, and so we're immersed in her kind of lore and historiography of everything. So, like, who is the voice of the person who's writing the enemy descriptions? Is that Azra writing them down, or is it someone else, perhaps?
The item descriptions?
No, enemy descriptions.
Oh, enemy descriptions. Right,
Or,
you were the one that did all those.
Well, I know, but whose story voice is that?
I think, like, for both the items and the enemies, I mean, they can basically work as Azra, because seeing as Azra as a writer, like, she's going to have multiple voices to work in. So there are points where I would have her work in kind of her, like, dry cataloging, I am a scientist observing things. I think we never outright say who's writing the descriptions for those things, because there are points where it seems like we're more or less addressing the player, where this is information straight from the designer to the player. We're still keeping it in story terms.
Right. And I kind of like wanted to like nail that kind of like British naturalist kind of description. Like, I mean, most famous, of course, is Charles Darwin, but there's others, I'm sure. But like, just like, you know, and then like all those little Victorian flower prints, just like randomly, gratuitously accompanying all the stuff they're talking about. And yes, time for slack.
It was very hard to draw just the right amount of foam in his mouth. There were a lot of revisions for that pose.
Yeah. And there's the screen shake and same explosion sound. And Slack's continuous obsession with shoes. And this is when we first start talking about crystals, I guess.
Yeah, the crystals, the backstory for that is they're all essentially curdled magic from the ultimate showdown that went down a long time ago.
So they're not that... What is it? Fulminated mercury or whatever from Breaking Bad?
This is not meth.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's get into it. So this is actually looks like when armor would normally be introduced. And then we get a little more information from Bacall here. Like, we try and like draw out more information just so that he can, because Azra's wanting this information here. And then, so yeah, so they're wanting to go and find the source of this information. And we get a little bit more backstory about Bacall's motivation. And, you know, if it's been this unreadable script, Azra rightly asks, you know, how can we figure it out? And we have a plausible explanation there.
Yeah, and something that comes out in Bacall's philosophy a little bit here is that he's not, in general, they're not super, like, sit back and contemplate monks. Like, this is a order-driven philosophy, and so they don't have much of a place for prolonged repentance. So it's like, if you're sorry, you're going to go and fix things. Fixing things is how you become whole.
Right. I mean, that can kind of like be to... That's kind of like simultaneously a pro and a con of that philosophical outlook, is that it's like, you're very proactive of making up for what you've done wrong, but you also tend to meddle with things and...
Yeah, and that's where you will actually have, I think this only comes across in one of the item descriptions you get, but there are warrior monks in the Selene. You have, like, the Selene House Militant.
Right. And so like, that kind of, like, super proactive thing, I guess, distances them from the Eastern tradition of Christianity. Maybe has more in common with the Western tradition. And definitely distances themselves, I guess, from more Zen Buddhism.
Yeah, I was trying to avoid, since so many of the inspirations for them were Zen Buddhism and then like Eastern Orthodox monasticism. I was trying to distance them a little bit from that.
Right.
And I felt that like the philosophy that they have would lead themselves to things like warrior monks.
Right. Cool. And then here we also have, the first appearance of crystals. And stuff like that. And whenever I try to introduce new mechanics like crystals, I try to like tie it into something you've already been doing. Like I try to avoid situations where you have a wholly new mechanic that's completely unlike stuff you've talked about. We had to throw this tutorial in because I wish I could have found a more elegant way to do it, but people just were like freaking out and not being able to deal with it. Have Slack say something hilarious about it. Zombified Jankly bits, eh? So we can see here, I mean, we've already dealt with armored enemies, but I'll put Slack down here. As we can see, he does like not an enormous amount of damage.
They're not super high leveled, so he can kind of manage, but he's definitely, you can feel that tax getting taken off his hits.
Yeah, I mean, and if we weren't power leveled a little bit, like, we'd definitely not be dealing with this. I mean, I feel like there's supposed to be a tutorial, like, Recall, like, explicitly talks about the crystals. And he is really taking it. Okay. So, here's another quick thing here, is that you can actually disable attacks by doing that selectively. So if you just want him to focus on healing, like, no matter what, I mean, normally this logic should do it by himself. He'll only heal whenever it's needed. Okay, here's where we get the tutorial. Then the call just spells out that you can zap this and nuke everybody. But so as I was saying, you can selectively disable skills here and that came in when there are certain situations, like a lot of the advanced tactics are like this, is that they're there if you want to use them, and you usually don't have to. But for some of the Grognods on our forums, they just want complete control over the game. And there's some situations where actually having a certain attack on the cooldown repeat is actually detrimental to what you're trying to achieve. And so I figured, I'll just click on it and just disable it, and then click on it again to turn it back on. It was really easy to implement.
Yeah.
And it gave people who want that kind of control, At first I was nervous, because anytime you add a feature or an ability to a game, especially one that's micromanagey, you also create what I call a strategy burden. So a good example, something you see a lot in Flash games, is whenever you kill enemies, like little coins get scattered around, you have to manually pick them up. And now the dominant strategy is to always like pick them up as quickly as possible. And whenever the dominant strategy isn't fun, you've introduced something lame into your game. So it's better to sometimes give the player less power and less ability if it doesn't add a new strategy burden. And a good example would be when people are hurt, they're worth less for recalling. Like, you get less PSI proportional to their health. And the reason for that is if you've got a full PSI return for recalling a guy, then the dominant strategy is to wait until the last possible second before a guy has died, and then recall him. And that's, honestly speaking, not very fun.
Yeah.
And so I remove that burden by making it so that when you recall them, they're worth proportionately equal to the amount of health they've got left. But sometimes you need to just listen to your fans. So it's like, I was afraid that like if I give people all these micromanagement tools,
They would then become necessary.
They would then become necessary because it's the best strategy. But it's a single-player game. You know, and so it's not that big a deal. You know, people who don't need it to win just don't use it and they do fine. Or they play on lower difficulties, and then those people who are like wanting to beat every play this game for 70 hours and beat every single level on every single difficulty on normal and New Game Plus will enjoy having that kind of control.
Yeah, I imagine this sort of thing is a lot more useful in New Game Plus or in some of our endless challenges.
Right. Like, you don't even need a lot of these advanced strategies in regular game. But in multiplayer games, this thing is different, because any tactic that can be used will be used against you.
Yeah.
And so, what I learned is because we're a single-player game, I don't need to worry too much about the strategy burden. But in multiplayer, you definitely do. Like, in multiplayer, adding the ability to micro like this will become a new dominant trait. And you see that in games like StarCraft, where actions per minute determines victory as much as broad strategy and making good decisions.
Yeah.
And you know, and that's one of the reasons I don't make too many multiplayer games is I just don't like dealing with that sort of thing. But that's just something to keep in mind when you're designing stuff. And it looks like we're dealing pretty well with these uber armored guys. Maybe these level 7s will be tough to deal with. So I don't think we're totally going to need these crystals, but I'm just going to pop one just to show you what it does. They're pretty fun. Yeah.
It hurts my soul a little bit to see Keto waste the rapid shot on the worm.
Yeah. We can deal with that. Probably, you know, I mean, if these battles start getting too easy for us, we're going to ramp it up to advanced whenever necessary. But that may be speaking too soon, because I know there are a couple of difficulty walls that are coming up for us. And so this blue text here is, of course, healing that is happening. And, yeah, I don't think we'll beat this one anyway.
Yeah, we might need to pop a crystal on these level 8 guys.
Or, like... I mean, I'm at full PSI, so I'll just put Hulk Hogan down here.
There we go.
Yep, now Rena levels up. So the question is whether we want to spec her for damage or icing people. And I kind of say that I like icing people. So I'm not sure, technically speaking, which one's better. I like this because it's a little more consistent, but freeze can be very, very helpful. I'm going to go ahead and get group heal. I think the Grognoids on the forums have determined that it is better to invest in aid and max that out than group heal, because the way the animations and damage cooldowns work out is that you get better healing per second just focusing on the individual one, and then he's fast enough with that he can hit everybody. So I mean that was a tough thing to balance for the healer, like and that little like wrinkle might be true, but I'm just gonna not care for this playthrough just because I put that skill in and damn it, sunk cost, I'm gonna use it. I'm going to go ahead and unlock this skill just so I can get to this one, because this skill is amazing.
Bleed.
Bleed is amazing for Berserkers. So then we talk about the crystal a little bit. And so this originally started as a mechanic, I believe. So a lot of times you have things from the story work their way into the game, but as a lot of cases, we actually had mechanics we started with and then tried to find natural ways to put it in the story. So the 6th spells, like, we had Frenzy, Lightning...
Are you going to spoil them all before we get them?
Well, yeah. Well, we have Frenzy, Lightning, something else, Heal, and the spell we're about to get. You know, and the first 5 I mentioned, you know, we settled on pretty just immediately. They seemed like good stock spells. But we had a hard time coming up with what the 6th spell should be. And, I mean, okay, I'll just go ahead and spoil it. Like, Pushback is one of our spells. You know, it pushes the enemies back. And we knew that basically is a spell that gives you time. And so the other spell that we had filling out our roster used to be Blizzard. And we were originally going to have you get that when you met Rena, and it would slow down all the enemies on the screen. But then we basically realized that if we had Pushback, Frenzy, and Blizzard, those are all basically 3 variations on the same thing. They all buy you time. Frenzy lets you get more damage out, like it makes your guys faster. So it buys you time, like it gets you the future faster. And then Pushback gives you back the past. It pushes the enemy back, it gives you more walking territory. So Frenzy doesn't get guys away from Azra, but it helps you kill them faster. And then we realized if we had Blizzard, I mean, not only would that maybe be a totally sick, game-breaking combination of push them back, frenzy your guys, and slow down all the enemies. It was also like, you know, you probably would have a hard time deciding where to invest your points, because then, like, they're all really dangerously close to each other.
Yeah.
So we needed to come up with another spell. And, that's where we decided, you know, to go with this spell, which is Crystal. And so we're kind of a little bit ambiguous in hand-wavy of exactly how Azra learns her spells. You know, we have one where she literally gets it from a scroll, which I feel like was perhaps a little bit, maybe a little bit too on the nose of learning the heal spell from a scroll.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of contradicts a little bit of what we're trying to set up with how magic works. But Crystal, she kind of like, given the fact that she has these weird abilities to manipulate the halfway world, and then the fact that crystals are congealed magic in and of themselves, you know, she kind of like puts 2 and 2 together and figures out the for lack of a better term, you know, how the science of magic works.
Yeah, we're dealing with kind of, I guess in Platonic terms, it would be the substance and the essence of things. So Azra's magic is all driven by the essence rather than substance. So you're in a world.
We're going to be beaten up by philosophers for that one.
Yes, definitely.
But it's a video game, deal with it.
But the idea is basically, in the halfway world, you're dealing purely with the essence of things rather than the physical substance.
In a very material
way.
So, what's interesting actually about the crystal spell is that in the original version of the game, the crystal spell was really convoluted. Like, I mean, I don't know why it basically functions as a placeable bomb. You know, but originally it was really convoluted. I don't know why it took me so long to just think of, like, the useful little bomb. The original version was the crystal spell was a defensive spell you would cast on your own characters. And what it would do, and this code is still in the game, it's just unused. The idea is that you would cast crystal on one of your characters, and it would encase them in a crystal and make them invincible. But then we're like, well, that's too powerful if they could still attack, and also be weird to be encased in crystal and still, like, animating and attacking stuff. So it should freeze you in place. But then that kind of has a disadvantage. Like, now you've taken that guy out of battle. So it has a countdown on it, and when the countdown ends, the crystal explodes and, like, hurts all the enemies around you. Or you can break it early by casting lightning, and so the idea is you would use this to, like, protect yourself whenever someone was about to, like, super hurt you. But then, I mean, it was just a stupid mess, because it's like, okay, so I'm going to spend money on a spell to keep a guy from dying instead of putting a $15 healer down.
Yeah.
Or casting the heal spell, or killing it, or whatever. It's like, it was a spell that basically had no purpose, and was funny about it, it made more sense as something the enemies would do to you. Like, oh, this guy's crystalled, and now he's taken out of battle, and now not only can you not use him, but you can't recall him, so that's almost worse than him dying. And now you just have to wait. And we're actually planning on having it be a spell, like the old crystal spell being like a bad spell enemies would cast on you, but we never got around to implementing it. Though, we always might. But anyway, the new crystal, like, works much better. It's a time bomb you put down, and then if you want to crack it early, you can blow it up with lightning. And it fits really well in our little smorgasbord of spells, and to put it into Magic the Gathering terms, it's an answer for one of your problems, such as, oh my gosh, there's a million guys all around the exit right now. So speaking of, let's get into battle here. And Keta, of course, is the voice of reason.
Slash the voice of snark.
Questions, you know, riddling, you know, building a city on top of a mine filled with explosives. And then this guy shows up. And we'll learn more about this guy here in a second. You want to talk about Marcos a little?
Well, he hasn't really had much in the way of dialogue at the moment.
So right now what's happened is that basically you've just run across him being attacked by Revenant, and you guys look human, so you look like fine friends to him, and then you start to completely perplex him with drawing him into the halfway world. So, is this a good setup, you think?
Yeah, it's always nice to have. You have your can opener, and then you have your meat grinder right behind it.
Yeah, that I believe that's the term we came up with for knights and berserkers. Is knights are can openers, berserkers are meat grinders. So this guy is a slow single hit armored tank. He does not deal out as much DPS as Slack does, but he deals heavy hits. So he's really good for going over damage tax, and also good for piercing armor and breaking it. I feel like in this game, like, we did a pretty good job of differentiating knights and berserkers. Like, knights are way, way better at not dying. But additionally, they're your go-to answer for armor. I do feel like they feel a little lock and key. You know what I mean? Like, they do feel kind of like... And we can see the armor breaking here. There we go. Well, let me turn off the...
With the bouncy numbers, it's no longer an RPG.
Right. But anyway, you can see... Yeah.
Well, he just straight up died.
Okay, let's put Keta in. Okay, I want her to... Well, if I put her here, she'll get murdered, but she'll be able to cover that bottom lane.
We can always plunk down a couple healers.
Well,
she's got...
What might be
armor.
smarter is to put a ranger here.
Yeah, then she's only
Boosted.
getting pulverized by one lane.
And then a ranger here, and so she covers this lane, she covers that lane, and that one, and that one, and that. You know, then we get this, 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 and this. All covered. And then he's here to take the aggro off of each of them. And then we'll have them spread out their damage.
I love the knight's animations. Just, like, each one of them feels so chunky. And it's like, he looks like he's smashing the crap out of things.
Now this is the perfect spot for a healer because he can get everybody. He's going to focus on healing. Might need more than one of them. So I might put another one like here. First chance I get. Give me $15. Give me 15 bucks. I'm not going to lose my rangers. Now, a key tactic that a lot of beginners forget is turn your rangers on to first when the enemies start to get towards the end of the level. Okay, and also cast heal before they kill your rangers. So, okay.
Might be worth plunking one of our other berserkers right there in that slot underneath Marcos, just to draw fire away from the rangers. Because what's happening is all those guys are just turning and smacking the rangers very first thing they do.
And I'm going to have the rangers both focus on first now to start killing those guys.
Oh boy. Might have to lightning that dude.
Might have to lightning this crystal here.
Yep.
Okay.
That was probably some poor advice with the berserker placement there. We've got one more berserker in our bag, right?
Yeah. I can put him here. I don't know how much good he's going to do. Oh, you know what? Sucks is I've got like 0 ranger coverage.
Oh dear.
That was a terrible idea. This was not.
Oh, we need 10 psi.
Dang it. Okay.
There we go. We can use it.
We've already gotten hit.
Oh, the shame of it.
Shame. Well, let's see. Well, you know, we'll take a hit. We'll show them what happens when you don't get perfect. Should have done is boosted a ranger earlier. Oh, well, now we're getting guys that are getting through. Put him on bulldog mode so he sticks with them. Yeah, so he's here. This guy is an armored guy whose armor's been knocked off. Now he's naked. Now we can do this. And we are losing guys left and right. We might lose this one yet.
Oh, there goes Luella. Oh, no, she's barely in there.
Yeah, we should be able to hold this one. Okay, I put him here and boost him.
Oh, that armored guy didn't get hit at all.
Okay. That is what crystals are for. That's what crystals and lightning are for. Yes! Whew. Okay, I'll settle for a pass. We'll go back and beat this on advanced or something later to erase our horrible shame. Okay, cool. So we got Marcos. That's important. So you want to talk about Marcos a little bit?
His red gloves are lifted straight out of the Red Cross Knight, illustrated by Trina Hyman.
Is that
basically
a children's book?
It's a children's book. It is, in my mind, it epitomizes how dragons are supposed to look.
That's funny. Is that like a St. George and the Dragon retelling?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, Trina Hyman was an illustrator, phenomenal illustrator that did a lot of just gobs and gobs of fairy tales. She did Little Red Riding Hood, all that sort of stuff, some Arthurian stuff. Sadly, going back as an adult, she has little to no concept of how weapons and armor work. So you have people that are wearing metal that fits skin tight without any seams in it and things like that, but
yeah,
for other things, it's awesome.
Yeah, indeed. And so, what he's telling us right now is, first of all, Marcos has kind of got this like Chewbacca-style life debt kind of thing, and he's also a noble of some sort.
Yeah, he's from like a very minor house, so he's not in line to the throne in any meaningful way, but he does have a lot of expectations placed on him because of his birth.
So this would be like Prince William's like fourth cousin or something.
Yeah.
Cool. And so he's basically, you know, since Revenant are invincible, you know, these guys have armor, these guys have weapons, they can chop them up, but they can't stop them. You know, and they keep coming, and so these knights are probably fighting a losing battle against these Revenants. So, the thing to underscore here is we're used to being able to beat up these enemies, and we need to remember that to Marcos, it's like he was just about to die. Like, he's probably lost a bunch of his guys, and we referenced that they were...
Yeah, basically all the armored guys we're fighting used to be his.
Yeah, and so, you know, he was about to join them. He was about to become the next, you know, batch of Revenant until Azra showed up, and so he owes her a legitimate debt now. And then, of course, he is smart with his life debt to make sure that it's qualified. And, of course, we can't resist the opportunity to follow a serious situation with a joke.
Marcos strikes me as someone who is very, very deeply frustrated with everything, and yet is constrained by the rules that he is unwilling to break.
Yeah. Well, what is it? I suppose to put it in modern terms, he's very English in that sense. Like, it's very, I mean, it's just been, like, built into him to just, like, keep up appearances because he's kind of that old tradition of, like, a medieval noble who's expected to fight. So it's not like the medieval nobles who are expected to just live off the peasants and never work with their hands. It's like, you're supposed to learn Latin and geometry and algebra and logic and philosophy and beat people up and lead battles from the front lines. And you must also, like, sip the teacup with your pinky in just the right way and that kind of thing.
Yep. So I think now that he's essentially living in the apocalypse, you get a little bit more of that frustration coming to the top, but he's still unwilling to break any of the rules that he's living his life by.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And shameful Blue Star. It's just mocking us.
Yeah. Well, I mean... That's what happens when developers, instead of people who are good at games, play them. Anyway, that's probably a good stopping point for now. But real quick, I want to touch on the fact, like we earlier said, that like Azra kind of plays the straight woman to all the crazy people. But I think Marcos is the true, just quintessential straight man to all of the crazy, insane psychopaths that you eventually pick up to join your party.
I mean, I feel like Azra takes things a little bit more in stride than he does. Like,
well, that's true. He always has something to say.
Yeah, he's always unhappy with it.
Well, I mean,
often unhappy in funny ways.
Isn't that the comedic tradition of the straight man, of Felix Unger to what's the other one?
I can't remember.
Well, The Odd Couple, you know, Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. You know, it's like one of them that sits there and goes, oh, you're so ridiculous. And the other one is like, I am crazy. Anyway, that's probably a good place to end it. We'll venture into this town for our next episode, and we hope you will join us. This has been Developers Play with Lars Doucet
and James Cavan.
Hope to see you next time. Goodbye.